cover-ups. The government has long claimed that the babies had inexplicably died and had simply been buried without the parents' consent. But until today, these families are claiming that their children were kidnapped and handed over for adoption to Ashkenazi families. Now the government has just reached a deal with the families of these Yemenite children to greenlight the opening of alleged graves so that DNA evidence can be gathered. Joining us now is Knesset member Nurit Koren, who is one of the driving forces behind this initiative. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So you have been heavily involved in this issue. Why has it taken so long for the government to uncover this mystery? It's been decades.
Yes, because nobody wants to open this story. So when I came to the Knesset, it's my first Knesset, and I said to the Prime Minister that I want to open this case because it's very, very painful case. And I must say, in this year, it's happened in all
I'll be able
over
to
the
make
world.
sure that when you walk
Not
down the
only
street, you ain't not
Israel.
gonna be shot.
The kidnap of
Your child isn't
children
gonna be shot.
to another
Donald J. Trump paid to 416.
adoption. It's not happened here. It's happened in Australia, in Canada, and we learn about it.
Right.
And it's not good. It's happened, but we must to tell
To face the reality and tell
Yeah.
the stories.
Yes.
Well, you
and
know,
to tell the family where
And there
is
is
the
Antifa
children.
too.
Right.
So
Trump needs
because
to
of
quit
that,
acting
I
like
asked
Hitler and just
Netanyahu
take away
to
everybody's
open
guns.
these cases
Gonna form no.
and all over the papers about it, and to tell the family where is the children.
At
right.
one
So we're still
Nicholas
waiting
Cruz
on a
is a
final
homegrown
Knesset
terrorist.
vote
A
for the
product of
alleged
the
graves
alt-right.
to be opened. Now,
Gonna form no
if the
fair
graves are
assistance by
opened
Trump
and
Fox
the
News
families
resist
are
impeach Trump.
right, how will the government compensate them? Can the
At
government
Nikka Haley.
compensate them?
I don't have words tonight. My
Let's
heart
I
breaks
say
for the
before,
students,
because
families,
we
and
understand-
community
we
dealing with a
need
shooting
to
in Florida
understand
today. The sadness
why
for
I
that
have
community will
this
be
law.
overwhelming and the
I
healing
have
will be
this
long.
law
We must lift
because
them up
we
in
have
prayer to get
3
them through this horrible
investigations.
tragedy.
Right.
And they didn't do the
At
work,
Macau,
and
Mexico,
they covered
Venezuela, and
all
Brazil all have very
the
strict gun control
story.
laws, yet those are
They
some of the
didn't
most
tell the
violent
truth
countries
to
in
the
the world,
family.
all of them with way higher
So
murder rates than
now
the US.
when
Nobody can
I
defend themselves in those
the
countries.
Prime Minister
Them's pushing gun
opened
reform, no one to
all
stay
the
here.
papers and everything, and all the archive of the state, we found a death certificate about the children. And when then we saw that there is a graveyard, and they said the graveyard is in
This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Surprise! Prices are rising. Inflation is here, but investors shrug it off, sending the Dow up more than 250 points.
Hunting for yield as inflation ticks higher. Not all dividend stocks are created equal, and it may be time to get more selective.
Behind the wheel, are you driving one of the most dependable cars on the road? Those stories and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, February 14th.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Well, if you do not understand this stock market, join the club. I don't either. 2 weeks ago, one of the most violent sell-offs in years was triggered, or so the Swamis say, when the monthly jobs report suggested that inflation would rise. Well, today we learned that inflation did rise. So what did stocks do? They went up. Maybe it's all just a case of turning that old market adage inside out. In this case, sell the rumor, buy the news. After a stumble out of the gate today, equities rallied, and strongly, for a fourth straight session. The Dow Jones Industrial Average advanced 253 points to 24,893. NASDAQ added 130, and the S&P 500 was up 35. Bob Pisani
1 in 6 children live in war zones. David Children says News DW 15.2018.
Most thought they'd go down.
Is the market worried about inflation or not? Stocks took a nosedive on February 2nd when the jobs report pointed to stronger wage growth. It fell early today when a read on consumer inflation came in stronger than expected. But by late morning, the market had recouped all of its losses and it moved higher. Now, what happened? Well, first, volatility has been a big worry recently. And today,
Inside Europe news and current affairs from around the continent, DW 15.2018.
Dramatically, indicating traders who make bets on volatility were betting that volatility would be lower in the next month. That relieved a lot of people. That's one. Second, if you look at the composition of the rally, there's a pattern. First, because interest rates are up, bank stocks, which would benefit from higher rates, have outperformed recently, while interest rate sensitive groups like utilities and real estate have been down. This all makes some sense. And while the markets are down this month, growth stocks like technology and industrials are not
China
down
wants
as
to
much
make a mark in
and
space, but
outperformed
it'll need a little
today.
help.
That's
Wired.
good news because it means the growth story is intact. It means traders still believe that the global economy is expanding and that earnings will be holding up. That's the growth story. And indeed, earnings are holding up. In fact, they're not just going up, they're going up for the first quarter, second, third, and fourth quarters of 2018. The bottom line, 10-year yields going up from 2.5 to 2.9%.
Market correction, just do what Warren Buffett does, says one investor.
To everyone. But it may not be enough to derail the growth story that is the true driver.
Carnival parades draw millions across Germany. News DW 2.2018.
At the New York Stock Exchange.
So what was it about that inflation number that caught the market and investors off guard? Steve Leisman digs deeper into the report.
Markets were gripped by a sudden inflation panic this morning when the government reported that the consumer price index leapt by 0.5%. Even taking away volatile food and energy prices, it rose 0.3%, both more than expected by Wall Street. The fit of panic set Dow Jones futures down nearly 500
Japanese
points
Trump agreed to keep up pressure on North Korea.
Wall Street seemed to take a breath and reconsider. Maybe it was the benign year-over-year inflation rate, just 2.1%, or the same as last month. Or maybe it was the idea that one-time items like a strange 1.7% rise in apparel costs in a single month were unlikely to repeat. Whatever the reason, markets collected themselves and collectively ignored the inflation threat to surge as many as 200 points during the day. So who had it right? The morning inflation Cassandras or the later day Pollyannas?
It's important to keep in mind that nothing over the last 2 weeks, so the elevated volatility, signs of inflation creeping back in, none of those represent
Turkish court-organized German ambassador entry to Kurdish politician as trial. News DW 14.2018.
What you've had is a series of growing pains from real interest rates coming off historical lows. Growing pains associated with inflation
Economists cite Trump as spending spree as foolhardy and unsound.
Of also, very low levels.
Inflation does seem to be firming. With low unemployment, higher wages, and plenty of stimulus from tax cuts, it's likely that inflation will go higher from here. But few see runaway inflation or a Fed that will hike much more than 3 or 4 times this year.
Y Syria and the US flashed for control East W for AT Syria deeply.
Still growing very strongly from a starting point of full employment or maybe even a little bit beyond full employment. So in that environment, I think the Fed's going to keep doing what they've been doing, which is tighten once a quarter.
For now, that's the difference between a Fed that raises rates by 3/4 of a point or a full percentage point. That's maybe why cooler heads prevailed. It's enough of a difference to worry about, but maybe not for a full-fledged panic. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman.
A number of key sectors across the economy are feeling the impact of rising prices. Morgan Brennan with a look now at where inflation is hitting hardest.
If you're wondering whether inflation is picking up, look no further than recent earnings. From construction equipment to food to travel, companies across industries are reporting higher costs, both for materials and for labor. Take Whirlpool, which recently warned higher commodity costs to make home appliances will shave hundreds
Illegal
of
fishing
millions
world
of
as
dollars
seafood supply
off
endangered
profit
by criminals
this year.
at sea.
We just see the inflation trends creeping in on many parts of our value chain.
And Whirlpool isn't alone. Caterpillar, Ford, Harley-Davidson, and Sherwin-Williams are just a few of the manufacturers grappling with a tighter labor market and more expensive materials as economic growth ratchets up. After years of concern that stagnant wages and cheap commodities
From India
could
to buying
trigger
South Africa,
deflation,
the rise and fall of
the
Augustus
recent
Friends
increases
24.
may be welcome, since some inflation is a good thing. The risk, however, is if it rises too fast.
It looks like it's accelerating. At the very least, all those Fed members who
Carnival parades draw millions across Germany. News DW 12.2018.
all those ideas about deflation in the middle of last year, forget about it. It's gone. Inflation's headed back to the 2% target.
One area to watch, transportation, especially for freight. The price to move
Hedge
goods
fund
by
Bridgewater
truck
makes
has spiked,
$22 billion
in some
bet
cases
against
by more
European
than
firms.
30% over the past year. A better economy, a driver shortage, and new regulations are all to blame. But those aren't expected to let up anytime soon. While that's good news for truckers, it's bad news for companies like Tyson, which now predicts higher meat prices this year. But perhaps the biggest signal inflation is emerging lies in telecom. After years of wireless price wars, Sprint and T-Mobile are both considering moves to dial back discounts. A big potential shift for an industry whose falling costs have helped tamp down inflation for years. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Morgan Brennan.
And the head of Goldman Sachs says the risk of the economy overheating is rising. He cited the combination of tax cuts and the potential for an increase in spending.
Chinese New Year means
at
a spending spree across East Asia.
Strengthening and people and companies are feeling pretty good. He made the comments on MSNBC's Morning Joe.
Obviously, the supply side view is that it wasn't at full capacity, and so they're putting a little bit more on.
The impact of Chechen and North Caucasian militants in Syria deeply.
That wouldn't be the move I would take when, if the fire is roaring and the coals are caught.
India's federal agency probing money laundering in bank fraud case.
Exactly. Especially if I might need that lighter fluid later.
Zero gravity party plane takes off in Frankfurt, Germany. News DW 072.2018.
It's much lower than where they are now. You're not necessarily with these deficits going to come up.
Understanding
with
America's endgame in Syria deeply.
Plan and et cetera. So I'd like to have some things in reserve.
So, does the economy have the potential to overheat? Joining us to talk about that is Russell Price, senior economist at Ameriprise Financial. Mr. Price, welcome. Good to have you
review
with
only
us.
Apple devotees need apply wired.
What do you think? I mean, there was one of the most respected names
Video
in
Antifa
American
picks day
finance,
fight.
Lloyd
Loses.
Blankfein,
Cries Alex
saying
Jones
he's a
info
little
hours there so
worried
on for your mind.
all of the stimulus that is in the system. Are you?
You know, I do think that the stimulus that we've seen does stand the potential to add a little bit more inflation to the economy, and that'll shave off some of consumer purchasing power. And it does come at an unusual time when the economy has been doing quite well. You know, over the last several years, people have been complaining about the economy doing a little bit being frustratingly slow. And it's been still strong enough for the unemployment rate to come down at a steady pace and inflation to remain in check. Now, this year, if we do see it exceed maybe the 3% level, if inflation takes off some of that
these companies are changing how Asia thinks about food.
Businesses, you know, there's some argument to be made that maybe we wasted a little bit of the stimulus that we may see this year and next year.
But if the inflation rate hits that 2% target,
Turkish PM hopes German journalist in prison for past year will be free. France 24.
For it to do just that, I mean, it would seem as though that would be a good thing.
Yeah, and 2% on the core rate, I think, is our standard outlook. We think it might be a little bit more than that by 2019, but generally we do think that that is the pace. So we're not exactly in the camp where we think that inflation is going to overheat anytime soon. We think that some of the fears and concerns may be a little bit ahead of themselves.
Bitcoin tests $10K as mysterious crypto trader debuys $400 billion zero hedge.
There's one big difference today than historically when we've seen wage inflation, particularly since the 1970s. And that is usually companies have to pass those higher wages on to customers in order to maintain their margins. This time around, they just got a big, very sizable tax cut. So they
Police
have
commander shot dead at Chicago government building.
Higher wages and still maintain their prices and still should end up with higher profit margins.
Is there
multiple reports confirm skilled Russians in Syrian oil field airstrikes?
Because many of them have never lived through an era where interest rates were rising in any kind of sustained way, not that they're going to get really way out of hand, or that inflation has been a factor at all.
Right. I think generally speaking, there are still an awful lot of dynamics in the economy that are very likely to
the fight for free speech. Alex Jones Info hours there as a war on for your mind.
Years, but for the foreseeable future. Things like demographics and slower population growth and aging societies and technology, the ability of technology to keep prices in check, those are very powerful dynamics.
Right.
I think that what consumers basically can do is not really worry about it all that much. There is going to be an adjustment phase for financial markets as they evaluate the data as it comes forth, like we've seen. But other than that,
Swan
I don't
song
think
of a
that,
central bankers, part 2
shall
my girl
pass,
zero hedge.
and should move on.
You're going to let me sleep tonight, Russell. Thank you. Russell Price with Ameriprise Financial.
A number of stocks tend to
Stormy
rise
Daniels
when
has a
inflation
Monica
runs
Lewinsky
hot.
dress.
According
Report
to one
says
study that examined data back to 2001, the top performers in the Dow 1 week after a stronger than expected report on consumer prices include the following: United Technologies, Apple, United Health, and Boeing. On the flip side, DuPont, Procter & Gamble tend to fall 1 week after an inflation report tops expectations.
Time now to take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. Target's rating was raised to outperform from neutral at Baird Equity. The firm says Target stands to benefit from remodeled stores and its acquisition of Shipt, a same-day delivery company. The stock's price target was increased to $85 from $75, and Target shares rose 2% to $75.35. Avis Budget Group saw its rating cut to sell from neutral by Goldman Sachs.
The New York Times fires tech writer Quinn Norton, and it has complicated wired.
Competition from ride-sharing companies and rising interest rates. Price target there cut to $33 a share. Shares of Avis fell more than 3% to $38.73.
MKM Partners raised its earnings and revenue forecast for Facebook. The analyst is urging investors to be aggressive buyers of the stock. The firm reiterated its buy rating and also its $240 price target. Shares rose more than 3.5% to $179.52. Fossil Group saw its price target raised to $25 at KeyBank. The analyst says Fossil's focus on wearable technology will lead to higher margins. Fossil reported better than expected earnings late yesterday. The earnings report helped fuel today's 87% rally in that stock.
And still ahead, Cisco's streak is over, and investors are cheering.
FCC watchdog looks into changes that benefited Sinclair. The New York Times.
Cisco is seeing a return to growth. It ended 2 straight years of revenue declines. The Dow component reported earnings and revenue that topped expectations. It also hiked its quarterly dividend and authorized a share buyback. Investors liked the results, sending the stock initially higher in after-hours trading. Josh Lipton has more on Cisco's quarter.
A positive report from Cisco across the board. It wasn't just the beat on the top and bottom. Also, gross margins came in better than expected at nearly 65%. Infrastructure platforms, the company's bread and butter core networking offerings related to switching and routing grew 2%. Michael Genovese of MKM Partners also highlights the board's decision to approve
Borneo's orangutan population plunged by 100,000 since 1999 by
enabled by the company's huge cash pile parked overseas, which it can now bring back thanks to recent U.S. tax reform. Genovese says that means Cisco is buying back a lot of shares, which will drive earnings estimates.
Stormy Daniels has a Monica Lewinsky dress, report says.
Lipton, San Francisco.
AT&T reportedly wants a top antitrust official at the Justice Department to testify during its merger trial. As first reported by the Wall Street Journal, the move is designed to challenge the legitimacy of the government's lawsuit. The government sued AT&T to block the telecom company's $85 billion merger with Time Warner. AT&T has previously questioned the department's motives. The trial is expected to start mid-March and represents one of the biggest antitrust cases in a generation.
Fannie Mae may require a taxpayer-funded bailout. This after the mortgage finance company reported a loss of $6.5 billion in the fourth quarter of last year. That loss
Essential is selling 3 stunning halos of its PS Prime limited time after mass protests. France 24.
Fannie Mae has been under government conservatorship since the financial crisis.
Injury to widespread brain networks in victims of mystery attacks in Cuba are technical.
The time it takes to permit infrastructure projects, and has pointed to a bridge that connects New York and New Jersey as an example.
Diving deep net. I always find the weirdest things. DRC reveals all about her exclusion from Smashing Pumpkins' #reunion Blastico. I found this in the dark corners of the internet. It was very scary. As the clock went down on the Smashing Pumpkins website, culminating in presumably, a Thursday announcement of a reunion tour, as well as new music. There remains vagueness about why original bassist DRC will have no involvement in any of it. Last month, DRC confirmed to Blastica that she was very disappointed that she would not be participating in any sort of reunion with the band and apologized to the fans for her absence. DRC has revealed somewhat coincided with a steady diet of Instagram updates by Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan that appeared to boot new Pumpkins music from the original band, or at least 3/4 of it, with producer Rubin in Los Angeles. Now it has come to light that the only original members involved in most of the recording were, in fact, Corgan and drummer Jimmy Chamberlain, according to text exchanges between DRC and Corgan. DRC believes I contributed to only one song from the sessions, although that hasn't been confirmed. Based on a text conversation between DRC and Corgan from mid-January, Corgan wrote, "Well, so you know, original guitarist, James isn't here either. It has me and Jimmy working and guitarist, Jeff Schroeder, now too. Essential is selling 3 stunning colors of its smartphone for a limited time, The Verge. Just take a minute and look at this. Essential is launching 3 limited edition colors of its phone, which will go on sale over the next week. Those include 2 announced at launch: Ocean Depths and Stellar Grey, and 1 new option, Copper Black. All 3 models will be available for $599, which is $100 more than the standard black or white model of the phone. Essential says it is only making a small batch of these new colors because colored ceramic is extremely difficult to produce consistently. The company didn't say how many units will be available of each. The unique teal and gold Ocean Depths design was first revealed on Essential's website way back in the spring/summer, along with a black, white, and matte Stellar Grey option. The black Essential phone led the bunch, and it took the company several months to ship a version with a white ceramic back, which does a much better job of hiding fingerprints and smudges. Ocean Depths will be available to order starting at 3 p.m. at today. Stellar Grey will launch at that same time on Tuesday, February 22nd, and the Copper Black model, which has the copper edge and a split black back, will follow on Thursday, February 22nd. Essential sold less than 90,000 units of its debut handset in the 6 months following launch, according to figures. A paltry number when held up next to the iPhones, Samsungs, and even the Pixels of the world. At first, the company's asking price was a little too high when you factored in the software bugs and very mediocre camera that the Essential phone shipped with. The $500 price the black and white models are currently being sold for is more sensible. Injury to widespread brain networks in victims of mystery hash attacks in Cuba by Ars Technica. Would you look at this? A preliminary case report on the victims of mysterious health attacks in Havana, Cuba details the results of extensive clinical evaluations, concluding that the individuals appear to have sustained injury to widespread brain networks without an associated history of head trauma. The report offers the first medical glimpse of the victims as government personnel and their families who were serving on diplomatic assignment in Havana. From late 2016 to August 2017, they reported experiencing bizarre and inexplicable sonic and sensory episodes. The episodes tended to include directional, irritating sounds, such as buzzing and piercing squeals, as well as pressure and vibrations. Afterward, the victims developed a constellation of neurological symptoms. In clinical evaluations of 21 of 24 individuals affected, an interdisciplinary team of doctors at University of Pennsylvania Spelman School of Medicine retrospectively pieced together symptoms an average of 203 days after individuals were exposed. They found that the most common issues persisting more than 3 months after exposure were cognitive impairment 17/21, balance issues 15/21, visual 18/21, and hearing 15/21. Problems, sleep impairment 18/21, and headaches 16/21. More specifically, individuals had difficulty remembering things 17/21, reported feeling more emotional 11/21, had trouble getting their eyes to work together to focus on nearby objects convergence insufficiency 11/21, were sensitive to sounds 14/21, developed headaches while trying to work 16, and had trouble maintaining a static posture while at rest 16. The doctors developed individualized rehabilitation programs for 18 individuals. While the doctors noted improvement from those efforts, 14 individuals with the most severe symptoms had not returned to work at the time of evaluations.